The following is a presentation of Coral Ridge Ministries.
What happens when a nation forgets God? Let's take a closer look.
The euphoria that Hitler caused is beyond belief.
It's not a government that forgets God, it's people that forget God.
People went to Nuremberg as skeptics, and they came back praying, "Our Father Adolf, which art in Nuremberg, the Third Reich come."
Christians by the hundreds of thousands in Germany said, well, we don't agree with Hitler's policy on the Jews, but we agree with his foreign policy, we agree with his economic policy, so we'll overlook that one issue.
And the leaders of the church were willing to allow Hitler to commit his atrocities and not speak out against it and not oppose it.
The pressure of Nazism had closed their lips.
Out of 14,000 evangelical pastors in Germany, only a little more than 800 stood up to Hitler.
Coral Ridge Ministries presents Tyranny, the High Cost of Forgetting God.
Welcome to today's program, where we want to focus on lessons we can learn from Nazi Germany so we make sure we never go down that same path. Our special guest today is Dr. Erwin Lutzer, pastor of Moody Church in Chicago and best-selling author. His most recent book is When a Nation Forgets God, 7 Lessons We Must Learn from Nazi Germany. Dr. Lutzer, welcome.
Great to be with you today, Jerry.
So why did you write this book?
I asked myself the question, why is it that the churches under Hitler, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, bought into Hitler's agenda? Now, Hitler was faced with a nation that was nominally Christian, perhaps a third Catholic, 2/3 Protestant. The question was how to isolate the church so that it would not have any impact in what is known today oftentimes as the public square. And that's one of the lessons that we can learn as to how Hitler did that. And the very same thing is happening in our own society, of course, where you have such a sharp distinction between church and state.
So, in other words, a nation must not forget God. Well, we have produced a brief report on exactly what happens when a nation does forget God. Let's take a look.
America is still a land of great freedom and prosperity, where religious liberty and free speech are in most cases protected. She has not completely forgotten God. And yet, are there lessons she can learn from a nation that did? In Nazi Germany, belief in the lies of Darwinism, racism, and the love of nation above God led to the eventual loss of all liberty and the mass destruction of life. Under Adolf Hitler's tyranny, 6 million Jews and millions of other so-called undesirables were exterminated, including Christians who opposed Hitler's worldview and practices.
The crimes of Nazism were so huge. But the point to be made is this, that there were certain cultural streams in Germany that allowed the Holocaust to take place.
One of those streams, says Pastor Lutzer, is that the Nazis completely separated God from the government, assigning churches to only the private sphere.
What Hitler did in order to win the good favor of the church is to guarantee, at least verbally, that they would have freedom. The problem was that all of those guarantees had a caveat. What he was saying is, you can have freedom as long as you stay within your boundaries.
And that meant staying out of public life.
The church just wanted to go along and get along.
Tony Perkins is the president of the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C.
I see some of those same patterns emerging in the United States today.
One of the dangers of the church agreeing to leave public life, says Perkins, is that she paves the way for God to be banned and religious liberty destroyed.
The United States is a secular country. Our nation cannot officially endorse a religious ritual.
For example, in Nazi Germany, Hitler forbid school prayers, banned Christmas carols and nativity plays, and actually changed the date of Christmas to December 21st, the date of the winter solstice. All the while, most of the church kept silent. In the United States, prayer in public schools has been banned since the 1960s. The Ten Commandments have been stripped from courthouses, and the celebration of Christmas exchanged in some schools for a commemoration of the winter solstice.
When a nation forgets God, I think we are building our own gallows.
Radio host Janet Parshall.
All of us have now, instead of having moral absolutes that God gave us to protect us as that loving fence of His law around our hearts and around our lives, and we do what is right in our own eyes, to borrow another passage out of Scripture, it's amazing how much problem we have.
A second cultural stream that led to Nazi Germany was when that which was evil became legal. When Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews, he first changed the laws, declaring Jews to be subhuman, thereby legalizing their killing.
We see that in America today. The unborn are treated as less than human and can be killed at the whim of another person.
Just as Hitler declared the Jews subhuman by law, so the United States Supreme Court said in the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, the word person, as used in the Constitution, does not include the unborn.
Sadly, the same kinds of arguments that we hear in favor of abortion are also used against those who are disabled, who are elderly, who can't defend themselves.
Germany at the time was the most literate, the most educated, the most scientifically, medically, and culturally advanced society in the world.
Dr. Richard Land explains why Nazi Germany's story is such a powerful warning to America.
They forgot God, and they began to worship themselves. And there's a part of us that thinks, you know, if that can happen in Germany, it can happen anywhere.
And that is why, says Wendy Wright, America must never accept the banning of God from our public life.
The United States has a great gift, and that gift is our founding fathers who did rely on God, who did believe in God, and built a country that is like no other country in history. But if we forget God, we will no longer be blessed. We will no longer prosper. And it won't be the people in our own country, Americans, who are harmed by that. The world will be harmed by that, because America has been a beacon for the rest of the world.
What a reminder of what happens when a nation forgets God. Dr. Lutzer, let's focus on the issue of who owns the children. And I want to start by a quote from Adolf Hitler himself. This is from November 6, 1933. He said, "When an opponent declares, 'I will not come over to your side,' I calmly say, 'Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." End of quote from Adolf Hitler. Could you please explain the significance of that quote?
What Hitler basically said in the quote that you just gave is this, that the body of the child should be raised by the parents, but the soul of the child belongs to us. We will capture the child's soul through state indoctrination and education. And the remarkable thing is that many of the techniques used in the educational system under Nazi Germany, they do have parallels to what we call today value clarification. Very fascinating as to how Hitler pulled this off. And that's why, you know, you have the Hitler Youth and separating the youth from the parents, from the church, trying to cut off all traditional values, and then taking that child through a process that will ultimately bring him to believe and to be committed to the Nazi agenda.
Well, let's take a closer look at this whole issue of who has charge of the children.
Biblically, the responsibility to educate children is given by God to the parents. But there have been those who sought to supplant the influence of God and parents for their own ends.
Hitler made it very clear in his speeches that as far as he was concerned, the soul of the children belonged to the regime. It belonged to the Nazis.
Dr. Erwin Lutzer is the author of When a Nation Forgets God, 7 Lessons We Must Learn from Nazi Germany.
Parents had the responsibility of raising the child in the sense that they would feed the body of the child, they would clothe the child, but at the end of the day, the soul of the child had to belong to the Nazi agenda.
Indeed, German dictator Adolf Hitler, recognizing that children form the society of the future, said, quote, "This Reich will give its youth to no one, but will itself take youth and give to youth its own education and its own upbringing." As a result, education by the state became mandatory.
He determined that he was going to nationalize the school apparatus in Germany.
Mike Donnelly is an attorney with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association in Virginia.
They wanted to get everyone into schools so that they could have control over children, and as we know, if you want to control the culture, you need to control the children and what they think and how they're taught and everything.
And amazingly, Hitler's schooling laws remain on the books in today's Germany.
Hitler abolished homeschooling in 1938, but actually even before that time there was some pressure against homeschooling. Unfortunately, what happened back in the Hitler era is happening today in Germany, at least in this respect. Parents are being told that they cannot homeschool their children.
In one case in a state in Germany, Rosemary and Jürgen Dudek were sentenced to 90 days each in prison for not sending their children to school. Now, I know this family personally. They're a wonderful family. Mr. and Mrs. Dudek are loving parents. They're very well educated. They're doing a phenomenal job educating their children. But in this particular state, there was a very aggressive prosecutor who went after this family.
And there have been other raids and prosecutions in Germany as well.
The law in Germany, which I happen to have read, says that the reason is because I translate it as the socialization of the child. That a child must grow up understanding its culture, learning to relate to those in its peer group, and if a child is divorced from that, the idea is that there will be something that is really missing in his life and in his upbringing.
The sad reality is that in Europe right now, there's a tension, and what I'm seeing is more of an aggressive posture with regard to policymakers in Europe about homeschooling.
Many in America have been concerned about the increasing secularization of public schools here.
It's based on, of course, the whole idea that education can be neutral, religiously neutral. The result of that is that children are being taught in their public, government-controlled schools that there's no place for God. There's no place for the Christian faith.
Dr. Karen Gushta of Coral Ridge Ministries is the author of The War on Children.
There are cases even where children are being penalized, they're being censored from referring to Jesus in school assignments and in valedictory speeches and so forth. And the result is that they are leaving the faith.
As a result, homeschooling is now an alternative for millions of Christian families. But surely what is happening to homeschool families in Germany could not happen in the United States. Or could it?
Thankfully, homeschooling is legal here in the great United States of America. But in the future, we have to be very careful, because I have no doubt that there are some who would like to take that privilege from us.
In 2008, a state appeals court in California ruled that, quote, parents do not have a constitutional right to homeschool their children, unquote. He added, a primary purpose of the educational system is to train school children in good citizenship, patriotism, and loyalty to the state. Though later overruled, it signaled a serious threat to non-government schooling. In Arizona, a family was threatened with the forcible removal of their children. In numerous states, homeschool families have been threatened with truancy proceedings.
It is so important for us to realize that the responsibility of raising children, loving them and training them, is with the parents, can never be surrendered to the state nor anyone else.
This is very disturbing. Dr. Lutzer, when I see that, I think, my goodness, the law that the Nazis put into place in 1938 against homeschoolers is still in effect today?
That's right. And once again, we can be very thankful that homeschooling is still legal here in the United States, but we have to be very careful about our future, because the state, the more secular the state becomes, the more determined it is going to be to do its own education of the children.
So, looking at this issue in general, when we see that the striking parallels between Nazi Germany and even modern America, we see those and we think, my goodness, what can we do?
Jerry, at the end of the day, I believe that America has drifted so far that there's no way that we can bring this country back simply by a change of politicians, even though politics is important. I believe that change is going to happen when every single Christian begins to understand her and his responsibility to live out their faith everywhere. We're talking about living it out in the home, of course, but also in vocations. We're talking about being involved in all levels of society, wherever God has planted them. Because I believe in America today there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of committed Christians who could make a difference if they really began to step up to the plate and ask themselves this simple question: what is my responsibility in this culture, beyond my own needs, for the benefit of my culture, my family, and my country?
Well, Dr. Lutzer, we're almost out of time, and there's so much more in your book that we haven't had the opportunity to cover. But as a concluding thought, what do we do when a nation forgets God? Is there any way we can get back on track?
Well, I think that there are many things that we can do. I'm not sure that there's exactly one answer. But what America really needs is a spiritual revolution. Our real issue has to do with the issues of the gospel and the transformation of life. And at the end of the day, we as evangelicals need to get back to the cross, its forgiveness, its cleansing, its reconciliation, and also to carry our cross into this culture and regard suffering for Jesus as a badge of honor and living faithfully no matter what the future holds.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lutzer, for being with us, and thank you for writing this important book, When a Nation Forgets God.
Thanks, Jerry, and God bless you.
Right now, we want to conclude with a brief message from Dr. Kennedy, founder of Coral Ridge Ministries, reminding us of the reality of what is lost when a nation forgets God.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that when he was just a young boy, he heard an old peasant in a very deplorable Soviet Union make this statement. He said he's never heard anything more profound in all of his years since then. The old man said, "We have turned our backs on God, and we have destroyed ourselves." The Bible says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. His eyes behold the nations. Let not the rebellious exalt themselves. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and the nations that forget God." Yes, God makes it very plain what will happen to those nations that forget God. It is a tragedy, especially for a nation like ours, which started off with such an exalted view of their Creator. Let us remember, and let us also remember by the actions we take to restore decency and godliness to this land. It can be done. And I, for one, am going to do everything I can to help bring it about. And how about you?
This has been a production of Coral Ridge Ministries.